Hi, good evening and welcome to this, I want to say, special FoodSense webinar. So we like to do these webinars once a week, but admittedly we just did one yesterday. But it's the holiday season, so we can be more responsive than, let's say, normal to technical inquiries, and that's what we're going to deal with tonight. So I'm going to talk a lot about tea this evening. I'm measuring the caffeine in tea. It's linked to a technical inquiry, but you will find that if the EP gets technical inquiry, especially from clients, we will answer them in these video formats, but you'll also notice that we kind of highly anonymize everything to make it sort of more general. We like the video format because it really helps us think through everything that's being, let's say, asked of us. And if you can kind of express yourself back to somebody quite clearly, then you've probably understood it quite well. So the first thing I want to do is just kind of give something that we've learned a lot from the chili industry is, now admittedly, there's something called dry weight and wet weight. So when dry weight and wet weight, what I mean by that is, if you measure a chili powder, something like a Carolina Reaper, you can find that it has a 2 million Scoville heat units. But if you measure a fresh pepper, you will find out it's got 200,000 Scoville heat units. And you say, well, what's the discrepancy here? Why is the dry powder 2 million Scoville heat units and the fresh pepper is 200,000 Scoville heat units? And then it's actually the water content. So when you read academic papers and they may talk about the caffeine in a sort of fresh leaf, be careful, because the clue there is in the fresh leaf, and I'll do some calculations in a minute. But a fresh leaf actually contains 70 to 85% moisture content, which kind of means that the caffeine in it is diluted per gram because there's actually quite a lot of water in that sample. But as you go along and you start drying out that sample, the caffeine will become more and more intense. So if you see a scientific paper where it says 18 milligrams per gram of a fresh leaf, they're probably meaning in a fresh leaf there's a water content of 70 to 85% moisture, and I do some calculations in a bit. Now, I must admit, I'm not the world's best, I'm certainly not a world expert in tea production, so I did have to look some of this up. But then you kind of have the next line of processing in tea, and that might be withering it, which to me looks a bit like slightly drying it out. But I can see when I look at this, it's still kind of greenish. And the moisture content there may be something like 50 to 60%. Now, the reason I'm saying all of this is that as you go along this process and you start driving out water, the milligrams per gram of caffeine basically will increase as you drive out more and more water. Now, I must admit, I put this into an AI generator to get this image because I wanted something that was kind of copyright free. So when I described it as rolling and oxidation of tea, they showed me literally some leaves in a row. But that said, that seems to be the next step in tea processing. And then you're talking about 30 to 45% moisture content. So the dry weight or the dry material is going up all the time as we go along. And then we kind of come to maybe something that I'm sort of more familiar with, which is... I've got some tea here, and that's probably pretty dry. And at that point, then the moisture content's gone down to more like 3 or 10%, which makes a lot of sense because now I understand that, when it's this dry, essentially, it's harder for things to kind of grow in it. So you've got a sort of longer shelf life. So depending on so essentially you can have the same leaf, but its apparent caffeine content will go up as you go through this process because you're basically getting rid of the water and increasing the concentration of caffeine per gram as you drive off the water. So I did some calculations here and kind of said, okay, if we've got a fresh leaf and it's got caffeine in it, then we may have something like 20 milligrams or 18 milligrams milligrams of caffeine per gram, and that leaf may have a sort of may have a dry mass at that point of 22%, with like 78% of it being moisture. Then you dry it down, and the dry mass increases, so approximately, let's say, 45%, and the caffeine will increase proportionally. Then we may roll and oxidize it. So now the dry mass is kind of more like a sort of 65%, and the caffeine's going up to more like 50 milligrams per gram. And then you may get into the scenario that I'm in with this kind of material where there's only something like 3 to 10% of moisture, and therefore the dry weight is more like sort of 92% ish, and the caffeine's been really concentrated, and now we're up in the kind of towards the 80 milligrams per gram. Now I'm going to do a couple of demonstrations here. One of them is a tea sample, and then one of them's a little bit unusual. It's just a buffer only, and I'm going to sort of emphasize the importance of looking at the data. And by the way, you can actually share data with us as well, but you're not obliged to. The more you share, the more support we can do. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a sensor and actually just change my screen for a second. So I will put a sensor in the FoodSense Generation 4, click it up, take my pipette, take 50 microliters of a tea sample. I must admit I haven't described how to prepare this, but it's 50 milligrams of this dry tea suspended in 1 milliliter of buffer. We did that's the caffeine buffer. Vortex for about 60 seconds, and then pipetted on. So this is the 50 microliters going on. Let me just set this up so I know where to find my data. It's really important to kind of really look at your data sometimes. And again, I always say this, I'm not trying to turn anyone into an electrochemist, but I mean, this is a scientific endeavor, so it's good to be kind of familiar with how the raw signals should look. T, I'll just make up some number, 333, right. Okay, so this is quite a dry tea sample, so I should get a higher concentration of caffeine. I'll pipette that on. I'll go continue, and I'll start the measurement. So I'm going to do two demos. One without, one that's really got no tea in it, and one that does have tea in it. I'll explain why I'm going to do this in a minute, and it should come to an end very shortly. So just come to the end now, and then I'll upload it and it will process it. In the meantime, I'll just share my screen with you, because we have a system called Julie. All the data that gets processed on this phone, if I can just hold this up, will actually get uploaded to the cloud, and then I'll be able to see that raw data in the cloud and be able to essentially analyze it. So there we go. Right, so I got, I wish I could hold this up a little bit better for you, but I'm not doing a great job of it. Let me just change cameras for a second. Right, so I've got something like 123 milligrams per gram here. Yeah, okay. I put that down, and I will share my screen with you here. And it's the wrong screen, and just do a quick refresh. Here it goes. Right, here it is, T. Because what it is I really want to, I've got my result, I've got the time and date, I know who did it, so I've got all this traceability, and I can see my caffeine signal very strongly here. Now I'm going to do something. The machine wasn't designed to measure a buffer only without any kind of tea in it. A true zero for this, when I'm doing this kind of work, would be a decaffeinated tea, for example. But even a decaffeinated tea is not really decaffeinated. There'll always be some caffeine left in it. But I just want to kind of show you why. I suppose in some ways I should really capture this. In fact, I might even capture this. But there's that strong signal there, okay, for caffeine. So that kind of tells me everything's working okay. And I've still got my result here as well. The 123 mg per gram of caffeine. Now what I'll do is I'll just go back to here. And I'll take off that sensor, put in a new sensor, which I am doing. Close it up, put a clean pipette tip on. You can see people know this, but I'm not putting the put pipette tips directly into these buffers. I'll take it for a second. I decanted. Right, and then I'm going to put, now when you see this, you'll think, well, that's just plain wrong. But let me just show you what the data looks like, okay? So I'll go done. I'll go continue. I want to go back, because I actually want to call it blank so I can clearly find it. So I'll just call it blank so I can find it. Blank, which is fine. Continue, start. Yeah, and it's measuring it now. A true 0 in this assay would be or close to 0 would be a decaffeinated coffee or a decaffeinated tea. A 0 is not the buffer. I know it's because in fact I can see already this will come back with a result, right? It comes back with a high result, but don't just look at the data now when I show you the data, because a true 0 in this assay is a decaffeinated tea or maybe a decaffeinated coffee. It's not the buffer itself. I've got a ridiculously high answer, but I want to show you where that is coming from. And that's like, again, I'm not trying to teach you in any way, teach everyone electrochemistry. I'm not, but I'm just going to give you a sense of, look, here's my beautiful signal when I've got, a true sample, let's say, and 0 in this case is not the buffer. It's actually a decaffeinated version of the material that we're actually trying to detect. But of course, it's very hard to get decaffeinated materials. But look, I want to show you why that might be misread, let's say. That looks nothing like a sample that I would just show you now. Look at that. Look at the way it's flat. See, that's completely flat. And look at this here. So what this is telling me, see, if somebody said to me, well, I tested with just your buffer and I got this result, but you could sort of criticize the extraction algorithm, but that's why I like go and look at the data just to make sense, because what you're looking at here looks nothing like the real sample. So admittedly, the algorithm has processed it, but when you're looking at a tea, I see this bump here, I see the caffeine bump here, and then this really high, let's say, non-specific part of the signal is all the way out here. But when you have nothing, let's say, associated with the tea in the sample, in just plain buffer, essentially, if I could just make it simpler. Look at the way this, admittedly the algorithm has analyzed it, but you would show it to somebody like me and I say, but there's no tea in this sample. You've just, detected the plain buffer, and look how flat that is. Look at the way it just goes stupidly high here. So I would absolutely know that the reason that the buffer gives us a number is because all the extra molecules that contribute to the way this assay works, and when I say all those extra molecules, all the extra molecules in tea are not there. And actually what we're analysing is just a very distinct signal. Not a distinct signal, a very different type of signal to one when it's a true sample. Now, one way I could, if we were super smart at ZP, is actually put an AI onto this, and so train the AI to kind of go, okay, so a tea sample looks like this. It's got these distinctive features. But if somebody forgets to actually add any kind of tea sample or coffee sample in there, and it looks like this, then we could essentially reject it. But we don't have an algorithm for that rejection. But that means that if people wanted to play the machine a bit and just put buffer on there, they could, and they would get a result. But then when they would kind of come to me with technical support, I would say, okay, well, I know what a tea sample looks like. In fact, it looks like this. And then I would ask the question, show me your data, and they show me your data, and I say, okay, the machine's not designed to just look at the blank buffer. You're not analyzing a sample anymore, you're just analyzing a blank buffer. So the quick answer is a blank buffer will give a result, but always look at your data, and you can see that there's none of those bumps here, and there's certainly not that nice caffeine peak that we get in the tea. So, yep, it will give a result, but I suppose with a sort of, let's say we're on generation 4, if we made a generation 4.1, 4.2, you could really put an AI in there to kind of throw an error and say no tea, no coffee, no caffeine source actually added to the sample. So that's how we could probably, let's say, improve the algorithm. So I did a demo, one of the tea sample, one of the buffer sample. If I was to summarize, if you are reading scientific papers and those scientific papers are giving you an expectation of maybe 18 milligrams per gram, and those scientific papers say on a fresh leaf, then just know that by the time you're probably processing or testing that sample, that is going to be higher, and the more moisture that's driven out of that fresh leaf. Now that fresh leaf might actually have quite a range on it, from 18 milligrams to 80 milligrams. So we understand you may get a whole range of results, but just know it's the moisture content, and the moisture content gets driven out, the dry mass goes up. Once the dry mass goes up, the apparent caffeine concentration, milligrams per gram, will also go up. And if you want to play with the machine and you just put the buffer on only, look at the signal, it's very different. We could get smart and actually put a sort of pattern recognition algorithm on that and say reject it because actually it's clearly a non-standard sample, but at the moment the algorithm will process it. But with ZP, you can see that we can troubleshoot quite quickly and sort of allay any fears. So if you've got any questions regarding the analysis of caffeine in tea, I certainly feel like we're becoming experts very quickly. Okay, take care, and always appreciate the feedback. Thanks so much.